Last time on the Skip and Josh podcast.
I don't know about you, but all I see are 1,000,001 commercials for all these gambling websites. That is all I have seen in the last month. Every single commercial. There are, I don't know how many different gambling websites out there.
How many betting sites do you need?
You only need one, but they want you to use theirs.
You're listening to the Skip and Josh podcast with Skip Sherman and Josh Obadia.
Okay, Skip, so today is a special episode. Obviously, the listeners cannot see us, but they might be able to hear that the sound quality is slightly different, and that is because, well, first of all, we're actually together, which is a rare thing.
Yeah.
But more importantly, we are currently in Las Vegas by the pool at the Wynn. So you may hear background noise, you may hear people talking, you may hear water splashing, you may hear music.
Bachelorette parties, it seems like.
All kinds of crazy things going on in Vegas.
Yeah.
And this actually breaks the rule of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, because we're talking all about it right now.
That's right.
But we figured since we're here and since it's the 250th episode, we're going to do a little something different, which is we're going to talk about our favorite episodes that we've ever done since we started this whole thing 5.5 years ago.
Right. Well, we started in in November 2017?
No, we did start in September.
Yeah.
I remember that. We didn't release it till a month or two later, but we started recording in September for sure.
Right. Oh, we would like to give people we've talked about it before, and if you go back and listen over the years, we've sort of mentioned it. You know, if you look at the first date of the first episode, it's like November 2017, right?
Right.
But really, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We still barely do. And so, we actually started recording episodes in September, and then we had to redo them because they sucked, and the sound quality, we didn't know what we were doing. And then we wanted to get 4 episodes sort of in the bag, right? Ready to launch. So we actually did a few dry runs. I still have those lost recordings. Maybe, if we ever get famous, we'll have the lost recordings.
And those will be worth a lot of money one day.
Yeah, it'll be like Peter Jackson will make a whole documentary based on the original, like he did for the Beatles, right? But it'll be the original lost recordings of the Skip and Josh podcast.
Imagine us and the Beatles in the same sentence.
Yeah. So November 2017. Yeah. Big, it's a wild ride. It's crazy that we're actually here in Las Vegas. We didn't plan it to have the 250th episode and this trip, and it's just worlds collided, and it ended up this way. And we're like, well, why don't we record at the pool? Which is exactly what we're doing now.
and the other good thing about this episode, for me at least, is there was no research involved, and I didn't have to do any work like I would normally do for a normal episode.
Right.
Because I can't do research while I'm in Vegas. A, I don't have my computer with me, and B, I don't want to sit in my room doing research.
But the thing is, I did a bunch of research before the trip. I went back and looked at all the episodes since the beginning and tried to flag some of the highlights of the 5.5 years. I think maybe you focused more on what I'm calling the favorites era, which is since the pandemic, right? Where we've done our favorite this, our favorite that. And I certainly have those to talk about as well. But so do you want to talk about some of your favorite moments in 5.5 years, or you want to?
I do. We'll get started very shortly, but there's just one thing I want to say. This is the first recording we've done where there's actually some danger involved, and that danger is I could get a sunburn while recording.
I think your feet are really going to be in trouble right now.
Well, I am wearing sunscreen, but I don't know if it's enough.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we should just get started then. Do you want me to tell you what some of my favorite episodes that we've ever done are?
Let's hear. I have a much bigger list, but why don't we start with yours, and I'll segue off of those, and then we can look at the stuff that I've sort of.
Okay. So one of my favorite episodes was when we did, and it's kind of recent, we did the biggest scumbags in sports.
Oh yeah.
But non-athletes.
Yeah.
I really like that one because, I like to vent my frustration, and there are a lot of scumbags that I don't like, and this gave me a vehicle to be able to talk about those scumbags, and I felt so good afterwards. I felt like I went to a therapy session.
Well, if you want to so that segues nicely into something that I could mention. Going back all the way to the episode 1.
Yes.
So now the way we name our episodes is our favorite sports scumbags, our favorite songs of the 80s. Like the topics
Or least favorite.
Or least the topics make them the topics the titles of the episodes make themselves. Like I don't have to write up. But for all those beginning episodes up until April 2020, I was always coming up with these weird titles of the episodes, and it's a lot of mental energy required for that.
Plus the descriptions that you have to write every
that's
week.
Still a lot of mental energy.
Yeah, it is.
But episode 1 was actually entitled Podcast Therapy, because we sort of quickly realized that the podcast was a vehicle for you to vent, right?
Well, we used to have a
Even back
segment,
then.
What Bugs Me.
Yeah, well, I have a whole list. Do you want to hear some of your most famous What Bugs Me's?
I remember them all, but go ahead. And I have new ones keep coming along.
Yeah, so like, you know, we often still do What Bugs Me. At the beginning, it was more like almost every episode we did one, right? But now it's like when something comes up, we mention it.
Mm-hmm.
But like there's been some wild stuff that bugs you, you know? First of all, power rankings. Everybody knows your hatred of power rankings.
Right.
Power play goals.
Yes,
Remember? That's
of
like,
course.
Like hold on, there's an airplane going. I'm just gonna
It's like we're at Shea Stadium.
Yeah. So power play goals, I know that bothered you because like why is there such an emphasis on power play goals when it's actually easier to score?
Right.
Bad stats, and you know, of course, everybody knows your hatred of Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, right? Mm-hmm. We actually did full episodes of What Bugs Me.
I was going to say we did a two-parter.
Yeah,
if I'm not
episode
mistaken.
48 and 49 was a two-part of just
Things that bug me.
Things that bug Josh.
There's so
right?
many things that bug me that we filled up 2 episodes.
Kirk Cousins, the Washington football team, dunks in highlights, pitchers unable to catch pop-ups, Gary Bettman, Bud Selig. These are some of the things that we've talked about over the years, and of course, topics like Belichick, Bettman, Selig. These come up often, right? Yeah. What bugs me? It's still something we're going to keep doing because obviously, like I said,
there's always things that bug me.
The podcast is a venting session, right?
You know, I think we even considered changing the name of the podcast to What Bugs Me at one point.
We did, yeah. We did. And it's still actually a viable name.
Although when we're talking about our favorite songs by a certain band, that doesn't really bug me, so it might not make sense.
Right.
So anyway, staying along those lines, another episode that I really enjoyed was when we did Most Hated Hockey Players. Mm-hmm. I was very happy with that one.
I'm seeing a theme here, so it's like the hated.
Yes, exactly. You are seeing a theme.
Yeah.
So that was another one that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And then to round out, I guess, not really my top 3 because there's others that I liked, but this was actually your topic when we did least favorite stats.
Oh, that was a killer episode.
Because that was the gift that kept on giving because we kept thinking of other stats weeks later.
Yeah, and even like we did our research, we came up with least favorite stats, and then I told you there's a bachelorette party here.
Yeah, that's fine.
And we had like a list of least favorite stats, both of us, and then as we were talking, I was thinking of new ones. Yeah.
And then the following weeks, even months later, I still think of like new stats, or not. They're not new, but they're stats that are just bad.
Right.
So I really enjoyed. You remember, of course, about a year ago, almost to the day, when the Montreal Canadiens went on a great playoff run all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah.
And we started recording episodes every night, or not every second night after a Canadiens game. They were very short episodes, which was fine, but it gave us, again, an opportunity to decompress and talk about what we just watched for the last 2.5 or 3.5 hours, because, you know, sometimes the games went into overtime and stuff.
Yeah.
And those were great because we were able to record them and you were able to post them so quickly.
Well, they were short.
Yeah.
They were short, and we didn't do a lot of editing. It was more like straight. But then, of course, you got worried. This is all happening. So this is episodes 221 to 229. And all like basically, look, the Montreal Canadiens took over this for us Montrealers or hockey fans who follow the Canadiens. Took over the summer of 2021.
Yes.
The Stanley Cup run, it consumed us. And but quickly we pivoted because we realized that we may have cursed the team by doing those episodes.
Right, because they started to lose.
Yeah.
And then I said, okay, we have to stop doing this.
Yeah.
And then when I said that, they went on a crazy long winning streak.
Yeah. So then
I think they literally won 7 consecutive games or something, maybe 8.
definitely 2 against Toronto, 4 against Winnipeg. So it's definitely at least 6, right?
At least 6.
Yeah.
And then when they finally lost, and we started recording again because we knew that it wasn't our fault.
That was really good times. The Canadians really entertained us and gave us topics for our podcast, more importantly.
Yeah. The other episode that I really liked was, I think, the first month that we did this.
Yeah.
It was also happened to be during the baseball playoffs.
Right.
And those baseball playoffs were actually exciting playoffs. They're not always good, but that year was good. I think it was the year the Cubs won the World Series, which they haven't done in over 100 years. So that gave us a lot to talk about, and it was fun to talk about that. So I enjoyed those episodes.
Those early episodes were really baseball heavy because it was the baseball playoffs.
Yeah.
And yes, it was a lot of Cubs stuff, right? Like we really talked a lot about the Chicago Cubs. They played in the World Series, the Cleveland baseball team. What are they called now?
They're called the Guardians, which is a terrible name.
The worst.
All these teams that are changing their names, I agree with them changing their names, but I don't like the new names. Like when Washington football team was just called the Washington football team, I think that was perfect. They didn't need to call themselves the Commanders. That's terrible.
They made a big mistake when they made an unintended great decision by naming themselves the Washington football team.
Right.
They didn't intend to do that, and it turned out perfectly.
Yes.
And then they, as that team is known to do, they screwed up, and they renamed a good name to a bad name.
Right.
It's so bad, right?
Terrible.
So bad. You can continue unless you want me to.
No, why don't you list some of yours? Those are my favorite ones that just roll off the top of my head.
So I'm not going to go in like chronological order. I'm just going to go by the order that I have on the notes, right? So like let's go to the pandemic, right? Let's just talk about the pandemic for a second, because obviously it's something that affected all of our lives. So the pandemic started for us in episode 173, believe it or not.
I didn't know that.
And you had a great title. Like I just said, I'm the one that always named the episodes, but you actually named that one because it was called You Can't Spell Pandemic Without Panic. I mean, we're making a light of it now because at the time, I mean, in March 2020, I don't think anyone knew this was going to last 2 years and what effect it was going to have, you know? And then obviously, like...
Before you go to the next one.
Yeah.
So one good thing about our show is that we were never together in the same room anyway before the pandemic.
Didn't change that.
So nothing changed for us.
That's right.
When the pandemic happened, except that we had to stop talking about sports because there were no sports to talk about.
But miraculously, because I just said 173 was March of 2020 when we literally that's the Rudy Gobert.
Yes.
Sports are shut. And it took us all the way from 173 to only at episode 188 did we transition to the favorites era, what I'm like to call
so we
the
did like
era.
15 episodes.
But
that
somehow we still found ways to talk about sports. But you remember we were talking about the weird stuff we were watching, like on the sports channels where they were showing old games.
Right, from 20 years ago and 30 years ago.
I love watching those old games and talking about those old games. We had a great discussion about like the Canada Cup '87 and the Olympics.
Or the Pedro Martinez game.
Oh, we did a whole episode on the Pedro Martinez versus the Reds perfect game. Yeah, so those were good times. So then obviously we switched up after the pandemic, and we get into like what I wrote down in my notes as the favorites era, where we're talking about a specific topic. And you're the one that had the idea to do like mostly top 7s of things. So some of them that I wrote down where I really enjoyed them is, well, we did the favorite movies of the 80s, favorite song lyrics, which we could keep doing forever.
Right. There's tons of those.
Albums of the 90s. We did our favorite French fries.
I love that one.
I mean, I know how much you love fries. Favorite Seinfeld episodes, like you know how often like we have Seinfeld references just in general conversation. I throw in the Seinfeld sound clips all the time, so it was natural to do favorite.
That was
Seinfeld
a hard
episodes.
one to do, to narrow it down to 10.
Right. Favorite 80s albums was a great one, and then I think my favorite of this era is, and I mentioned at the time, is our favorite guilty pleasure songs.
Yeah.
Like that episode, I had so much fun recording. We were laughing. I was smiling the whole time. Imagine we're talking about like Barry Manilow and Rihanna and Dua Lipa, like these artists that normally we never ever would mention.
I had no idea you liked Dolly Parton. And Barry Manilow. I had no idea. I was stunned.
That was like really, really fun, to talk about. Like I really enjoyed that episode. So that's the favorites era, and those are the more recent ones. But going back in time, episode 31.
I don't remember what that was. You'll have to give me the title.
How do you pronounce Pyeongchang was the episode title.
Okay, well, you pronounced it properly.
At the time, I remember, I wrote it on Facebook, I looked it up. We had a discussion about NHL players going to the Olympics or lack thereof.
Right.
I just remember listening back that episode after we posted it and thinking, the conversation we had about players going to the Olympics or not going to the Olympics was better than anything that anybody could have watched or listened to on any podcast or any sports TV show in Canada. That was it was that good, that conversation. It was fantastic.
We're pretty smart,
Well, about certain things. I mean, another one that goes in, we had episodes that we did that were like part of the favorites era, but they weren't because we did them way before. Mm-hmm. So for example, episode 148, we did our all-time Expos team. And we also did an episode about our all-time Duke team.
Yes.
Or we did actually our favorite songs that are sports-related songs.
Songs from the big chair?
No, songs
Tears for Fears?
Songs about sports, right?
Okay.
That was like way before we changed formats, but I guess it was like a little teaser towards the new format at the time.
Who knew? Yes.
Yeah,
it was foreshadowing.
So you mentioned that we're at the Wynn, which is awesome, and it's really hot right now, by the way.
Yes.
Episode 145, we did on location at the Orange Julep in Montreal.
So that was the first time we did an outdoor episode, I think.
Yeah, that was summer 2019. Do you remember what we talked about in that episode?
We talked about movies that had just come out, I think, at the theater, right?
We did. We talked about the Queen movie and the Elton John movie, and there was a passerby that interrupted us and said, "Hey, are those movies good?" And you were like, "By the way, you're in a podcast now." But we actually talked about the main topic in that episode was that the Raptors had just won the NBA championship.
Ah, that's right.
And it was huge. It took over all the sports news in Canada. Mm-hmm. It was such a big thing, right? Go ahead.
And the Raptors just got eliminated yesterday, by the way.
They did, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, no episode that discusses our favorite episodes of the first 250 could be without our end of year episodes.
Those are the best ones, actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like a real review of the year. We talk about our favorite sports moments. We talk about also like our favorite music, TV, movies, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So it's really those are fun to do. At those times, everybody's doing lists at the end of the year. You get to December of every year, everyone's doing their list of the year. And so we do ours, and I think we have a good time doing them. And I think they're especially for now that so much of our lives, since the pandemic, is streaming entertainment, I think people like hearing what we're watching because people want to know what should I watch, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me ask you a question. This one and the one that we did at the Orange Julep, are those the only two outdoor episodes that we've done?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so, yeah. We very, very rarely recorded actually in person, in general.
Right. Usually the year-end episode has been in person.
Sometimes
because I'm in Montreal at that time of year.
Exactly. There's one episode that we recorded normally, but it was about a road trip.
Right. We didn't record it while on the road trip.
Episode 50, Skip and Josh go to Cooperstown.
By the way, look, there's other people doing recordings as we're sitting here.
Yeah, these are some influencers, right? Doing some Instagram stories and TikToks.
Yeah. Anyway.
So, yeah, we recounted our trip to Cooperstown.
I forgot about that. That was a really good episode.
That was really good. And actually, when I look at the download stats, that one always had the most. I think it's our most downloaded episode, Skip and Josh go to Cooperstown. Maybe it's because the title too, right? It catches people, right? We also did we can talk about guests. At the beginning, we used to have some guests, and then I think we quickly realized we didn't like it.
No,
right?
I didn't realize, before we did it, how, first of all, it's challenging because the guest is not there.
Yeah.
So now you're dealing with a third person, sometimes more, who's not in the same room as you. It's already difficult enough for you and me to not interrupt each other.
Right.
When you add a third or fourth person, it makes it even worse.
So we did March Madness preview episodes.
Yeah.
And we actually did one with 3 guests.
Yes, but not at the same time.
Not at the same time, but we had Costa, our friend from Chicago.
Yeah.
We had Rob from Montreal.
Yeah.
And we had Neil Schnurback, who's actually our most frequent guest. He's been on more than anybody else because
he's also quite knowledgeable about a lot of sports.
Yeah, he knows a lot of
college
stuff.
basketball, football, golf, you name it.
Yeah.
Gambling. He should be our gambling consultant.
So those were fun episodes to do, you know, because we're so into March Madness. But like you said, the guest aspect, that's pretty tough.
It is.
Yeah.
So we don't need to have guests anymore.
No, I wrote here, guests equals no good.
I agree with that.
And actually, we had another episode where we had, when the Patriots played the Falcons in the Super Bowl.
Yes, I remember. We had 2 guests at the same time.
Yeah, we had Mike from Atlanta.
That was
and
logistically
Neil,
challenging.
who's a huge Patriots fan, and they kind of gave their picks, right?
Right.
And we all know what happened then. Poor Falcons.
Yeah. Poor Falcons. Poor me. I was miserable that day.
Now, I'm going to tell you something what we don't like to talk about. I'm telling you our best episodes. A topic that's come up, and every time it's come up, we shut each other down to try not to talk about it, and that's golf. So if you want to listen to golf, this is not the show for you.
No, we can direct you to golf podcasts, but not this one.
Right. The only other stuff that I know that I had written down were some of like some of the interesting discussions that we had, like, and great discussions. So like there's 2 that come to mind. We did our first emergency podcast in episode 22. Do you remember that?
Was this when the Montreal Canadiens fired their coach?
Yeah.
And the funny thing about that is, I think the day before that happened,
Yeah.
I said to you, we may have to do an emergency podcast tomorrow.
Yeah. It was imminent that Therrien was going to get fired, and you told me, like, be ready because the hammer's going to fall any day.
And sure enough,
it did. And then another episode that I loved doing was episode 79. That's from February 2018. I don't know if you could remember what happened then, but the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl.
Oh, I was thinking that was when the Winter Olympics were happening.
That too, but when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, I was on cloud 9, you know?
So was I, only because they beat the Patriots.
That's right. And there was another like series of episodes when I started looking at the lists. I was looking at it in chronological order, and there's like a 4 episode streak. Episode 105, 106, 107, 108. And so 105, top sports songs, which I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
It was the prelude to our favorites era.
Right.
Episode 106, where we recap the entire final season of the show The Americans.
Oh, that was a great episode.
Episode 107 was called Fasten Your Seatbelts, and episode 108 was called Road Trip. And that's when Duke was doing their Canadian tour, Toronto and Montreal, and you wrangled a press pass, and you interviewed Coach K, you talked to Jay Billis, you did stuff that, like, thinking back now, like, how is it even possible? Like, you went to a press conference for Coach K in Toronto.
2 of them, actually.
Yeah, but you went to the first press conference where he's talking to the Canadian media for the first time. And who asks the first question? You.
I made sure I was sitting in the front row. I was the first one to get there, and I asked the first question. And I was the only person to ask a question that had nothing to do with RJ Barrett or nothing to do with coming to Canada. I asked a question about
NCAA rules.
There was a new NCAA rule that had just come down a few days earlier, and I wanted Coach K's opinion on it.
So those were great episodes because you actually went with your recorder. What was your phone? But like you recorded interviews. I spliced in the interview clips, and then you met Jay Billis in the hallway and talked to him, and it was like, what a wild ride, right?
And also,
like, honestly, like, we recapped the game in Montreal with Duke versus McGill, and I just remember I went with my son, and we met you there. We didn't sit with you because you were sitting with the big wigs in the press row.
Also, there were no empty seats. It was sold out, so I couldn't sit with you.
It was like, when people ask me, like, what do you think about that game? I was like, I remember just walking into the arena. I know I'm a Duke fan. I know you're a Duke fan. I know some others. But I don't know if people in Montreal even follow college basketball.
Right.
And if they do they like Duke? We don't know that. And I just walked into that arena full of Duke jerseys, full of Duke hats. And I remember I said to you, Josh, we're with our people.
Yes.
We're in the right place. We're where we're supposed to be.
And that arena is all the color blue because it's sponsored by Bell.
Exactly.
So it almost looked like it was a Duke home game.
Exactly. I mean, that's my whole list. Like, I went through
I can't believe I forgot about those Duke episodes.
There's one last thing that I want to remember, and I saved it for last because it's possibly the most important thing.
Okay.
We cannot talk about great episodes and the experience of 250 episodes of a podcast without talking about, like, some of the other independent podcasters that we've met along the way.
Right.
Just via social media, by whatever. I've been a guest on a bunch of other shows.
And I've been a guest on 1 or 2 other shows, yeah.
You know, so just want to shout out to a couple of people. Matt Sanderson and Phil Primo, their podcast doesn't exist anymore. It was called the Semi-Intellectual Musings, and at the time we did a tragically hip episode with them right after Gordon Downey passed away. And then we did a crossover where they came on our show and we talked about a variety of sports topics. And then, of course, Matt continued his own podcast.
Nooks and Crannies?
Exactly, the Nooks and Crannies podcast. He's on a hiatus. He messaged me saying, if I want to guest, and he's going to restart it up, but he did take some time off. But like, that's a valuable relationship. I mean, I just showed you yesterday, he commented on my Facebook post about our trip to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Right? So like, I'm friends with him, although we've never met. I'm Facebook friends with him, and we comment on each other's stuff a lot, and I appreciate that. And then, of course, anybody who listens to this show knows that like, we've become podcast buddies with Jesse Jackson from Dallas, Texas, who does a Springsteen podcast called Set Lusting Bruce, and he's like our number one fan. Like, he emails me after every episode giving his top 7 of whatever we're talking about. He took the time to send us a voice message congratulating us on the 250th episode.
Skip, Josh, it's your friend Jesse Jackson from Set Lusting Bruce, all the way down here in Dallas, Texas. Just sending you guys congratulations on hitting 250 episodes. And so in honor of that, I thought I would give my top 7 Skip and Josh episodes in no particular order. Top album covers, top 7 places to get fries, top Springsteen songs, of course, favorite song lyrics, favorite scenes from Love Actually, guilty pleasure songs, and the latest episode, fictional TV sports. Congratulations, guys. I hope you do another 250 more.
So that was great, so I really appreciate like everything that Jesse does for us. He tweets episode links before I do them.
We need to hire him as our PR guy.
Right. So that's like, we can't talk about our show without mentioning the other people we met along the way.
And I would like to mention one other person who was a guest on our show, and I was a guest on his show, Joseph DeBenedictis.
That's right.
Yes. So he's also been generous enough to come on. We had a U2 episode where we interviewed Joe because he's followed U2 and seen them in many different cities and many different venues.
Right.
He's a big U2 fan. And he's got his own podcast now. He's also got his own YouTube channel.
It's like the Canadian, I don't know, I think he changed the name of the podcast, but it's like, it was called The Americans because it's Canada and United States, but then he realized that it's possible to search for that.
Right.
So it's like Canada versus US things.
Right.
Those are great. I love his, the podcast and his YouTube channel are fantastic for that.
And he had me on to talk about the pandemic because actually he did interview me when the pandemic first started. And then he interviewed me 2 years later, and my thoughts and views had changed completely from in those 2 years.
Right.
So he wanted to know what was going on with me and how I was dealing with all of it.
Right. So where do you think the next, I don't want to say the next 250, that's a long time.
That's a lot of episodes.
But like, what do you think the next year of the podcast is going to look like? More of the same topics? We still have a pretty robust list of possible topics.
We do. We have a lot of things that we haven't talked about yet. And listeners continue to send us in ideas, which is nice. And for example, we're still watching television. New shows are coming out all the time. So you know how we did our favorite, well, not necessarily a favorite, but we recapped The Americans?
We should do the same for Ozark.
We could do the same for Ozark. We could do the same for Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
You still need to watch Better Call Saul, and you still need to watch The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
But Better Call Saul, I need 5, that's like a lot of TV viewing
it
for
is
me
a
to
lot of
catch up.
TV, yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's why it's okay. We've got time. We've got a few years.
Well,
To the
what
next
we do have
250.
is time.
We have lots of time.
Right. All right, so Josh, congratulations on 250.
Congratulations to you.
It's been amazing.
And I know I mentioned this on the last episode, but I'll mention it again. Thank you very much to you because, again, you do all the work. You do all the editing. You do all the posting. You do all the social media stuff. All I do is talk.
Yeah,
so thank you very much.
Talking is a big part of it. So I think it's still a balance. Even though maybe you don't see it, I think there's still a really good balance. And I do enjoy
Yes.
this. Going back to the fall of 2017, you can ask my wife, like when I was trying to figure out like how to do a podcast. It was like a super project for me. And I loved every second of figuring out what to do, and then of course like making it better. And now look, we're recording at the Wynn Hotel with this fancy little recorder,
I remember you sent me, before we ever did our first episode, I think it might have been a few years before we did our first episode, you sent me emails saying, this is what we need to do if we want to do a podcast. Like, you need to download this software, you need to get this type of microphone, and then we need to sign up for this type of account and stuff like that. It's going to cost us this much per year.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, clearly you had done all the research, and then we didn't do anything for a few years, and then finally we did it.
So my only regret of the podcast is that we waited too long to do it, because we talked about it for so many years. And I think if we really would have done it when we started talking about it, we would have started doing this 5 years before. You know?
You're right.
Well, yeah.
Yes, and I have mentioned this before. I don't know if I mentioned it on an episode we recorded, or I just maybe mentioned it to you in passing, but there's a stat out there that like 98% of podcasts that start fail.
Yeah.
So the fact that we're in the 2% that didn't fail is kind of remarkable.
It's huge. You know, when you look up podcasts, like I told you this, I want to look up a podcast about Ozark. I find some, but
there's dozens.
There's dozens that don't get past season 1,
right?
Or that never continued,
or week 1,
or you know they're there on Apple Podcasts for everyone to see, but they've never continued. There's hundreds of those. Well, obviously more than hundreds, thousands.
Oh, and by the way, today you brought this up to me today because I didn't even know this, and I thought this was the coolest thing. We're staying at the Wynn Hotel.
Yeah.
We all have Alexas in our room.
Yeah.
And you said to Alexa, play the Skip and Josh podcast.
And she did.
And apparently we're on Audible.
I didn't even know. Like you just said, I post and whatever. When Alexa said playing the Skip and Josh podcast from Audible, I was like, you never put us on Audible. But apparently somehow we got on there. And I looked it up after, and all the episodes are there.
That's amazing.
All right, Josh, we're going to enjoy the rest of the day in Vegas. It's about 90 degrees in the heat here. And we'll talk to you next time.
Excellent. I love it. Have a great week.